Hey everyone, tonight we are going to climb into a time machine, a slightly dusty, somewhat rickety contraption fueled by the crackle of a forgotten Victrola, and travel back to a world you've only ever seen in black and white movies. We're heading straight to the heart of the Roaring Twenties, a decade where the world spun on its axis so fast it left a dizzying trail of sequins, cigarette smoke, and forbidden cocktails in its wake. This is a story about the flapper, that iconic symbol of rebellion and a revolution in silk and scandal, and the peculiar, almost alien, way she dated. As you settle in, picture yourself right there on a bustling city street. The air is thick with the smell of gasoline from the newfangled motor cars, and the sweet perfume of women who had just discovered the magic of face powder and rouge. The sidewalks are a blur of bell-bottom trousers and shockingly short hemlines. The sounds of jazz music spilling out of a clandestine speakeasy door. You probably won't survive this new world, not with your modern sensibilities. The rules you know, they're all about to be thrown out the window. So and before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop a comment with your location and local time. And let's see how far and wide our sleepy community stretches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the precipice of a seismic cultural shift, a moment when the world finally exhaled after the breathless tension of the Great War. You've lived your whole life under the stern, corseted thumb of Victorian morality, where a woman's worth was measured by her propriety and her ability to remain unseen and unheard. But look around you now. That world is dissolving like a sugar cube in a bathtub gin. The Jazz Age, as F. Scott Fitzgerald so famously christened it, isn't just about the music. It's a complete tearing up of the social contract. Your parents' generation courted with formal visits in the family parlor, always under the watchful eye of a chaperone. But you're about to be set loose into a landscape of dizzying freedom and brand new dangers. The change wasn't just sudden, it was a defiant roar. The generation that had just witnessed the world's most devastating conflict decided they would seize life with both hands, refusing to live by the old, stuffy rules that felt so hollow after such immense loss. Historians still argue whether the war was the sole catalyst, or if other forces like industrialization and women's suffrage were already pushing society toward this tipping point. Regardless, what you're seeing is a world embracing the new. You might be used to the idea of dating as a casual activity, a way to get to know someone before things get serious. But in the 1920s, the very concept of dating was still being invented. Before this, the primary goal of courtship was marriage. You didn't just go out with someone, you were calling on them, a formal, heavily regulated process. Now, with more women working and living independently in cities, the old system was becoming obsolete. The telephone, the automobile, and the sheer number of young people congregating in new public spaces all contributed to this radical break from the past. It's a new world, one where the old script is useless. The language of romance and courtship is being rewritten in real time, and you, my friend, are smack dab in the middle of it. Forget everything you know about holding hands and sharing milkshakes. This new generation, the flappers, are about to invent their own set of rules. Rules that would seem wild, even a little scandalous, to the people who raised them. And frankly, they're pretty bizarre from our perspective, too. So, let's take a moment to adjust your expectations. This isn't a story of sweet, innocent romance. This is a story of a cultural rebellion playing out in dance halls, in the back seats of Ford Model Ts, and in the hushed, illicit glow of speakeasies. It's a story of a generation shedding their parents' skins and creating a new identity, one that would shock and scandalize the world. And it all begins with how you look. So, you've taken your first look around this new world, and the first thing that strikes you is the clothes. The fashion you grew up with was a veritable cage of fabric. You remember the corset, that bone-in steel contraption that cinched your waist so tight you could barely breathe, all in the pursuit of an hourglass figure. The dresses were long, heavy, and layered, often with high necks and bustles, demanding a posture of rigid, almost uncomfortable on propriety. Every move you made was restricted, a physical manifestation of the social straitjacket you were expected to wear. But now, all of that is gone. The flapper's silhouette is a radical departure, a declaration of independence sewn in silk and chiffon. You see women with their hair chopped short into a severe, chin-length bob or a slick, shiny, shingle cut, a style that looks almost scandalous in its simplicity. This wasn't just a haircut, it was an act of rebellion. Long hair had for centuries been the ultimate symbol of femininity, a woman's crowning glory. To cut it off was to sever ties with the past, to embrace a new, streamlined modernity. It's like today's trend of getting a dramatic tattoo to signify a new phase of life, but 100 times more shocking. And the dresses, they're no longer cinched at the waist. Instead, they hang loosely from the shoulders, dropping straight down to a shockingly high hemline. We're talking about hemlines that are suddenly at the knee, a full foot or more higher than the fashions of the previous decade. The drop waistus is the defining feature, a band of fabric that sits low on the hips, giving the wearer a boyish, almost androgynous figure that was a complete rejection of the curvy ideal of the past. The whole look is designed for movement, for dancing the Charleston until you're out of breath, for sliding into the back seat of a Ford and a life that doesn't involve being told what to do. The fabrics are lighter, two georgette, crêpe de chine, and charmeuse, often decorated with intricate beadwork or fringe that would shimmer and sway with every step. This new style was more than just aesthetics. It was a psychological shift. It allowed for freedom of movement, a physical expression of the social liberation flappers were pursuing. A mainstream historical fact is that this fashion was directly tied to the new, more active lifestyle of women. The Gibson girl, the idealized woman of the previous era, was a picture of serene, demure femininity. The flapper, by contrast, was a portrait of energy and motion. She could drive a car, play tennis, and dance all night without her clothes getting in the way. It's the difference between being a porcelain doll and being a living, breathing human being. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is the debate over the perfect length for a flapper dress. While hemlines rose, they didn't always stay at one uniform height. The hemline index, a whimsical theory that links the length of a woman's skirt to the state of the economy, suggests that short skirts appear during times of prosperity. The flapper's rising hem was seen by some as a direct reflection of the booming economy, a giddy optimism expressed in inches of exposed calf. And of course, the stockings thin, often made of silk or rayon, and held up with garters. A flapper wouldn't be caught dead in the thick, wool stockings of her mother's generation. Sometimes she would even roll them just below the knee, a subtle but noticeable signal of her carefree attitude. But it wasn't all sunshine and scandal. This new fashion caused a massive backlash. Moralists in older generations saw it as the decline of civilization. The word flapper itself was initially a derogatory term meant to suggest a young bird flapping its wings before it could fly properly. Historians still argue whether the flapper was a genuine rebel or just a savvy consumer, using fashion to project an image of freedom without necessarily engaging in truly radical behavior. Did the clothes make the woman, or was the woman already a flapper, just waiting for the right clothes to come along? Regardless of the debate, the clothes are a physical manifestation of the new dating etiquette. The old system, based on rigid decorum and supervised parlor visits, couldn't survive a world where women wore clothes they could actually move in. A woman in a corset and a floor-length gown simply wasn't going to be sneaking out for a late-night drive or dancing the night away at a clandestine speakeasy. The flapper's outfit was a uniform for a new kind of social warfare, a battle for personal freedom fought one hemline at a time. The revolution isn't just in the mind, it's in what you're wearing right now. And with this new look, you're about to be set loose, completely unsupervised, into a world of possibilities. With your new, unfettered silhouette, you're ready to step out. But the old world hasn't quite caught up yet. You remember the old rules, don't you? The ones that dictated that a young lady never, ever went out alone. Her social life was a meticulously planned ballet, and the chaperone was the stern, watchful conductor. This older woman, often a mother, an aunt, or a family friend, was an unblinking third eye on every date, every stroll, every social visit. Her job was to enforce the strictest decorum, to ensure that no scandalous conversation was had, no improper physical contact occurred, and that a young woman's reputation remained as pristine as a freshly starched lace collar. This system of supervised courtship had been the bedrock of polite society for generations. It was designed to protect a young woman from both unwanted advances and her own potential missteps. It was a societal safety net, albeit a rather constricting one. The chaperone was a walking, talking moral compass, a constant reminder of the expectations of your family and community. You would sit in the family parlor, a space that was more a public display of respectability than a private room, and entertain your suitor with the chaperone seated just a few feet away, knitting or reading a newspaper. Her presence a silent but powerful deterrent to anything untoward. But now, look around you. The chaperones are vanishing. They haven't just retired, their entire purpose has been rendered obsolete by a new, more independent generation. The social landscape has shifted dramatically, with young women increasingly moving to cities for work or education, living in boarding houses or small apartments far from the prying eyes of family. They're earning their own money and making their own decisions about how to spend their evenings. A mainstream historical fact is that this migration of young women to urban centers for work was a major driver of the chaperone's demise. They were simply too far away and too busy to have their every move policed. This isn't to say that all chaperones disappeared overnight. Some families clung to the old ways, but their daughters found clever ways to circumvent the rules. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that young couples would often go on group dates, where the collective presence of friends served as a kind of informal, modern chaperone. The idea was that there was safety in numbers, and the sheer chaos of a group of friends would make any one-on-one indiscretion difficult to manage. You might all go to the movies together, or pile into a car for a drive, and while the parents believed there was an adult present, it was often just a bunch of teenagers having a laugh. This was a new way of navigating the social rules, a kind of wink and a nod rebellion that paid lip service to the old ways while completely ignoring them. Historians still argue whether the decline of the chaperone was a positive development for women. Was it true liberation, a moment when women were finally trusted to make their own choices, or did it expose them to new dangers and pressures without the protective buffer of an older, wiser observer? It's a good question. Without a chaperone, a young woman was now responsible for her own reputation, a burden that could be both empowering and terrifying. The old rules were clear, even if they were restrictive. The new rules, however, were still being written, and they were far more ambiguous. This newfound freedom from supervision directly leads to the heart of flapper dating etiquette. With the parlor now a relic of the past, where are you supposed to go? The answer is simple everywhere. Dating moves out of the private home and into the public sphere. It's no longer a formal meeting between two families. It's a social outing between two individuals. You can go to a movie theater, a cafe, a dance hall, or even a speakeasy, all places where a chaperone would feel utterly out of place. The very architecture of the city is now your new dating playground. So, you stand on the threshold of a new social era. The stiff, formal rules of courtship have been tossed aside, and the person who was once your personal jailer has, for all intents and purposes, been given the pink slip. It's an exhilarating, slightly terrifying moment. You're free, but you're also on your own. The next step is to figure out where, exactly, you're supposed to go with this newfound liberty. The world is your oyster, and it's no longer confined to the four walls of your family's parlor. Now that you're free from the chaperone's shadow, you might be wondering where you're even supposed to go on a date. The old rules dictated that courtship happened in the parlor, a designated formal space within the home. It was a space designed for a single purpose to receive guests under the strict gaze of your family. It was a place of high-back chairs, polished wood, and hushed conversations, a controlled environment where a suitor's character and financial prospects were discreetly vetted. But let's be honest, it wasn't exactly an ideal spot for a heart-pounding, life-altering romantic encounter. More like a job interview with a teacup. The flapper, however, has no time for parlors. She is not a woman to be confined to a single room, and her romantic life is far too vibrant for the stuffy confines of a family home. The new dating scene is a revolution of location, a complete shift from private to public spaces. You are now going out, a term that didn't really exist in the same way just a decade earlier. The city itself has become your playground, offering a dizzying array of places to meet, mingle, and get to know someone without the watchful eyes of a chaperone or a nosy younger sibling. A mainstream historical fact is that the rise of commercial leisure activities created these new public spaces, movies, dance halls, and, of course, speakeasies were all relatively new phenomena that provided perfect backdrops for the modern dating ritual. The movie theater, or picture palace, was a marvel of the age. You could sit in the dark, side by side with your date, sharing a whispered joke or a secret glance as a silent film flickered on the screen. The anonymity of the crowd and the dim lighting offered a kind of intimacy that was impossible in a family parlor. It was a shared experience that didn't require constant, stiff conversation. It was also, a very popular spot for holding hands, which was still considered a pretty scandalous thing to do. But the real heart of the flapper dating scene was the dance hall. This was where the energy of the decade truly came alive. The music, that new, syncopated, slightly scandalous sound called jazz, was a physical force, compelling you to move in ways your parents would have deemed utterly indecent. The foxtrot, the tango, and later, the wild athletic Charleston weren't just dances. They were a new language of physical expression. The old waltz, with its rigid, formal steps, was a dance for chaperones. The Charleston, with its swinging arms and kicking feet, was a dance for rebels. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that dance halls often hired taxi dancers, women who could be hired for a single dance by male patrons. This was a new social dynamic that completely blurred the lines between dating, entertainment, and, some would say, something a little more illicit. The most thrilling and dangerous of all the new public spaces, of course, was the speakeasy. With prohibition in full swing, these illicit, hidden bars became the ultimate destination for the adventurous young set. You'd have to know a password or a secret knock to get in, which added an element of delicious danger to the whole experience. The low light, the crowded tables, the clinking of illegal glasses, and the intoxicating sound of jazz made for a sensory experience that the prim and proper parlor could never hope to replicate. It was a secret world, and for a flapper, secrets were what it was all about. Historians still argue whether this shift to public spaces was a net positive for society. Did it foster a more open, honest approach to courtship? Or did it merely make it easier for young people to engage in behavior their parents would have disapproved of? It's a good question. The public nature of these venues meant that while you were free from your family's gaze, you were now subject to the scrutiny of society at large. A woman's reputation could now be made or broken not in her home, but on the dance floor or at a clandestine table in a smoky back room. This new freedom was a double-edged sword, offering liberty but also a new set of dangers. So, as you step out of the parlor and into the dizzying, brilliant chaos of the 1920s city, you are leaving behind a world of rigid formality for a world of spontaneous adventure. Your dates are no longer stiff, polite encounters. They are an escape, a thrill, a little bit of a risk. And in these new, exciting public spaces, you're about to discover a brand new kind of intimacy, one that's far more physical and far less verbal than anything your parents ever knew. So you've escaped the parlor and are now navigating the public spaces of the city, armed with your bobbed hair and your scandalous, straight-cut dress. The air is electric with possibility, and the rigid moral codes of the Victorian era are starting to look like a dusty old relic. But with this new freedom comes a brand new set of rules, or, more accurately, a lack of rules that are still being written. And this is where we get to the really juicy stuff. The part that had parents clutching their pearls and newspapers wringing their hands in moral panic. We're talking about the rise of petting RE. The term itself is a bit quaint now, isn't it? It sounds like something you'd do to a golden retriever. But in the 1920s, petting was a revolutionary and highly controversial term for a very specific type of physical intimacy. This was an era where the lines between courtship and premarital intimacy were being redrawn. Before this, the prevailing social expectation was that physical intimacy was reserved for marriage. Sure, there was a little hand-holding or a chaste kiss, but anything more was considered a one-way ticket to ruin. The flapper generation, however, was in no mood to wait. A mainstream historical fact is that petting became a widely accepted part of the dating process, a way for couples to explore physical closeness without crossing the line into intercourse. This new behavior was a direct consequence of the chaperone's demise and the newfound privacy offered by cars and other public spaces. Petting, which could range from kissing to more intimate forms of touching, was a kind of a middle ground, a negotiated territory between the rigid sexual abstinence of the past and the full expression of sexuality. It was an acknowledgement that young people were sexual beings, but it still maintained a certain level of social control, as it was often done in private or semi-private settings and was considered a different category of act than, say, a full-on affair. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that college campuses had specific, often unspoken, hierarchies of petting. This wasn't some free-for-all, there were levels to this. Light petting might involve kissing and caressing, while heavy petting moved into more intimate areas. There were even popular magazines that debated the ethics and dangers of petting, sometimes with shockingly clinical and condescending tones. The fact that a term like petting party could enter the social lexicon at all shows just how much the boundaries of acceptable behavior had shifted. It was an open secret, a phenomenon everyone was talking about, either with breathless excitement or with grave concern. Historians still argue whether petting was a sign of genuine sexual liberation for women, or if it was just another form of male-driven exploitation. Some scholars believe that by engaging in petting, flappers were taking ownership of their own bodies and sexualities, exploring physical pleasure on their own terms. Others suggest that it was a way for men to pressure women into physical acts without the commitment of marriage, and that women were often ceding to these advances out of a desire to be popular or accepted. Was it an act of empowerment, or was it just a new social pressure? The debate continues. The rise of petting also created a new kind of social anxiety. What were the rules? How far was too far? These were questions that previous generations hadn't even had to consider. The flapper was forced to navigate a brand new moral landscape with no map, no chaperone, and no clear-cut expectations. It was a thrilling but also potentially dangerous game. A woman's reputation could still be tarnished, even if she hadn't gone all the way. Petting was a public statement of private intent, and it was a bold, risky move in a world that was still very judgmental. It was a new world where a reputation could be as fragile as a silk stocking. So, as you find yourself in the back of a car or in a dark corner of a dance hall, you're not just engaging in physical intimacy, you're participating in a cultural experiment. You are part of a generation that is redefining the very meaning of romance and relationships, one forbidden kiss at a time. The chaperone may be gone, but the ghost of her disapproval still lingers, making every act of rebellion just a little bit sweeter and a little more dangerous. The new freedom you're experiencing is thrilling, but it wouldn't be possible without a new invention that's rolling off the assembly lines in droves. We're talking, of course, about the bean automobile. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that before the 1920s, a car was a luxury item, a plaything for the wealthy. But with Henry Ford's mass production and the advent of the assembly line, The Ford Model T becomes affordable to the middle class, and suddenly, the landscape of dating is irrevocably altered. Before the car, your dating radius was limited to how far you could walk, ride a bicycle, or take public transportation. A date meant staying close to home, or at least in a well-trafficked, well-lit part of town. Now, however, the world has opened up. You and your date can drive to a roadhouse on the outskirts of town, a quiet spot by the lake, or simply park on a darkened street far from the prying eyes of neighbors. This new mobility is a direct assault on the old system of courtship, providing unprecedented privacy and autonomy. A mainstream historical fact is that the car's role in dating was so profound that sociologists and moralists of the time began to refer to it as a house of prostitution on wheels. This was, of course, a gross exaggeration, but it does illustrate the moral panic it caused. The car provided a shielded, private space for young couples to engage in the very petting we just discussed, a space that was entirely free from the disapproving gaze of society. The intimacy of a car ride, the close quarters, the shared experience of traveling somewhere new together, it all fostered a new kind of romance, one that was far more adventurous and physical than the one your parents knew. Historians still argue whether the car was the single most important factor in the social revolution of the 1920s. Was it the car itself, a machine that gave people the freedom to move, or was it the cultural shift that was already underway? With the car just providing a convenient vehicle, pardon the pun for that change, there's no easy answer. The car was a potent symbol of modernity, of speed, and of progress. It represented a break from the slow, horse-drawn pace of the past, and it was only fitting that it became the chosen mode of transport for a generation that was in a hurry to get to the future. The car also changed the dynamics of the date itself. Suddenly, the journey became as important as the destination. A spin in the car was a date in and of itself. You might just drive around, talking, laughing, and listening to the rattle of the engine. It was a new way to spend time together, a kind of mobile cocoon that insulated you from the outside world. And for a young man, owning a car was a powerful status symbol, a sign that he was modern, successful, and capable of providing for a future family or, at the very least, capable of providing a fun night out. It was a kind of dating arms race, a race to have the flashiest or at least the most functional vehicle. So, as you buckle up, or rather, just get in. As seatbelts weren't really a thing yet, you are not just going for a drive. You are participating in a fundamental reordering of how humans interact. The car is more than a machine. It's a social tool, a privacy pod, and a symbol of your generation's defiant independence. It allows you to explore not just the physical world beyond your hometown, but also the emotional and physical worlds of your relationships. Without the car, the flapper's dating etiquette, with its emphasis on freedom and privacy, would have been impossible. It's a box of metal and glass, but it's also a powerful engine of social change, and you're about to put it in gear. You've got the new clothes, the freedom from chaperones, and a shiny new car to whisk you away from the confines of the family parlor. What you don't have, though, is the old charade, formal system of calling or courting. That ritual of a man visiting a woman in her home, the two of them conversing under the watchful eyes of her family, is a thing of the past. It's too slow, too stuffy, and too restrictive for the fast-paced, jazz-fueled world you're living in. In its place, a new concept is solidifying, a word that would come to define the way we interact romantically for the next 100 years. Dating. The term dating itself, in the way we understand it today, is a mainstream historical fact that really only took root in the 1920s. Before this, you went with someone, or you were courting. The word date was originally a slang term for a social appointment, and it took on a romantic connotation during this decade, signifying a casual, pre-planned outing between two people. This was a crucial shift. Courting was a serious affair, with the implicit goal of marriage. Dating, by contrast, was a form of entertainment in and of itself, a way to have fun and get to know someone without the immediate pressure of a lifelong commitment. It was a lower stakes game, and that made it all the more appealing to a generation that was living for the moment. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the term date might have emerged from the idea of a calendar, where you would literally write down your date with someone. It was a way of standardizing a previously informal process, of turning a spontaneous social engagement into something with a time and place. This may seem like a small detail, but it reflects a larger cultural shift toward efficiency and modernity. Dating was, in a way, a more efficient form of courtship, allowing you to meet and evaluate potential partners without the lengthy, formal rituals of the past. It's like the difference between sending a formal invitation in the mail and a quick text message. One is a commitment, the other is an invitation to hang out. Historians still argue whether this shift to dating was a sign of a more superficial approach to relationships. Did the emphasis on fun and entertainment mean that young people were less invested in finding a truly compatible partner? Or did it allow them to get to know a person's real personality, their sense of humor and their character, in a more natural environment than a stuffy parlor? It's a good question. Courting was all about family approval and social standing, but dating was more about personal chemistry and a shared sense of fun. It's the difference between marrying a person your family approves of and marrying a person you actually like. The establishment of the dating concept fundamentally changed the relationship dynamic. Before, the man was expected to be the initiator, and the woman was expected to be the passive recipient of his attentions. The power dynamic was clear and rigid. With dating, while the man was still typically expected to initiate and pay, the woman had more agency. She could accept or decline, and she could go on dates with multiple men without being accused of being a scarlet woman. It was a kind of social testing ground, a way to see who you clicked with without having to make a commitment. So, as you ask someone to go on a date, you're not just inviting them to a movie or a dance. You are, in a very real sense, participating in the creation of a new social ritual. You are helping to define a new way of interacting, a way that is less about duty and more about choice. This shift from formal courtship to casual dating is the invisible thread that runs through all of flapper dating etiquette. It's the framework that allows for all the other peculiar behaviors, from petting in cars to dancing the Charleston, to take place. It's the new normal, and you're right at the heart of it, scheduling your next social engagement on a clean new calendar. With the concept of dating now firmly established, you've got to figure out where to go. You could go to a movie, you could go to a dance hall, but for a true taste of the flapper era, there's only one real destination: the word speakeasy. A mainstream historical fact is that on January 17th, 1920, the 18th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution took effect, ushering in the era of prohibition. The nationwide ban on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverages was supposed to clean up America's morals, but for the flapper generation, it just made everything a little more exciting. Prohibition didn't stop people from drinking. It just drove the drinking underground. Speakeasies, so named because you had to speak easy or softly to avoid being heard by the authorities, popped up in every city. These were hidden clubs, often tucked away in the back of seemingly legitimate businesses like barbershops or delis, or in basements with secret entrances. The illegal booze, the secrecy, and the thrilling risk of being raided by the police created an atmosphere of delicious danger. This was a direct contrast to the sober, stuffy world your parents grew up in, and for a generation that was already rebelling against the old ways, it was the ultimate playground. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is the incredible variety of drinks invented to make bathtub gin, a notoriously foul-tasting alcohol, more palatable. Bartenders, who were now essentially working in an underground, unregulated market, got incredibly creative. They'd mix the low-quality liquor with juices, sodas, and other flavorings to create cocktails with names like the Bee's Knees, the Mary Pickford, and the Sidecar. This was the birth of modern mixology, a direct result of a country's attempt to outlaw alcohol. It's a great example of how human ingenuity, when faced with an obstacle, often just finds a way around it, often with delicious, albeit slightly dangerous, results. The flapper was often seen with a long, thin cigarette holder and a brightly colored cocktail in her hand, a potent symbol of her defiance. Historians still argue whether prohibition created the flapper culture, or if the flapper culture was already emerging and prohibition just gave it a more exciting backdrop. Was it the ban on alcohol that made young people so eager to rebel? Or were they already primed for rebellion? And the speakeasy just provided the perfect venue. It's a classic chicken and egg scenario. What's undeniable is, however, is that the speakeasy became the quintessential flapper dating spot. It was a place where the old rules were not just ignored, but actively subverted. The atmosphere in a speakeasy was unlike anything you'd experienced before. The air would be thick with cigarette smoke and the scent of perfume, the room buzzing with the low murmur of conversations and the exhilarating sound of live jazz music. The close quarters, the shared secret of being there, and the general feeling of being part of an in-group created a sense of intimacy and camaraderie. You weren't just on a date, you were an accomplice in a delicious crime. The speakeasy was also one of the first places where men and women drank together in large numbers. Before Prohibition, drinking was largely a male activity, confined to the male-only space of the saloon. The flapper's embrace of drinking was a powerful symbol of her new equality and independence. She wasn't just a passive observer in the dating ritual, she was an active participant, sharing a drink and a joke with her male companion. This was a massive social change, one that helped to break down some of the old, rigid gender roles. So, as you step through the hidden door and give the secret knock, you're not just going out for a drink, you're stepping into a new world, a world of illicit thrills and intoxicating freedoms. The speakeasy is more than a bar. It's a sanctuary for a generation that is determined to live life on its own terms. It's the ultimate backdrop for a flapper date, a place where the rules are few and the possibilities are endless. You've made it past the velvet rope and into the dimly lit, smoke-filled speakeasy. The clinking of glasses and the low murmur of conversations are punctuated by the pulsating rhythms of a live jazz band. But it's not the music you're here for, not entirely. Anyway, it's what the music allows you to do. The dance floor is the heart of the speakeasy, and for the flapper, it's where all the action is. The dances you grew up with were structured, formal, and designed to keep you at a respectable distance from your partner. The waltz, with its rigid steps and formal box formation, was a dance for a chaperone's world. But the dances of the 1920s are a whole different animal. The Motsigur Foxtrot Tournée the Mayor Tango. And, of course, the wildly energetic Charleston aren't just dances. They are a new language of physical closeness and expression. A mainstream historical fact is that these new dances were widely seen as scandalous and immoral by the older generation. The Charleston, in particular, with its frantic kicks and flapping arms, was considered a public display of impropriety. It was a dance that emphasized individual expression over a synchronized partnership, with dancers often improvising their own steps and movements. It was a physical manifestation of the individualism and rebellion that defined the flapper era. The dance floor was a place where you could quite literally let loose, shedding the emotional and physical restraints of the past. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some cities and towns actually tried to ban the Charleston, often citing its lewd and immodest nature. These attempts were largely unsuccessful. Of course, because trying to ban a popular dance is like trying to ban the sunrise. It's just going to happen anyway, and people will just find a way to do it in private. The prohibition on dance halls was a direct corollary to the prohibition on alcohol. Both were attempts by the older generation to rein in the flaming youth, and both were met with a shrug and a smirk. Historians still argue whether the physical closeness of these new dances was a sign of a more sexually permissive society, or if it was just a new way to interact in a world that was still very repressed. On the one hand, dances like the tango, with its close embrace and suggestive movements, allowed for a level of physical contact that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. On the other hand, the dance floor was a public space, and the energy of the dance itself often served as a kind of emotional release, a way to express feelings without having to articulate them. It's a good question, was the physical closeness of the dance floor a prelude to a more intimate encounter, or was it the main event itself? The dance floor was also a kind of social equalizer. A man didn't need to be rich or have a fancy title to ask a woman to dance. All he needed was a sense of rhythm and a willingness to get a little silly. The dance floor was a meritocracy of movement, a place where social barriers could be temporarily forgotten. It was also a crucial part of the dating ritual. You could assess a person's personality. Were they graceful? Were they fun? Were they too serious? All in the span of a 3-minute song. So, as the band strikes up a new tune, you're not just getting up to dance, you're stepping into a new social arena, a place where a woman can touch a man's arm, laugh in his face, and kick her legs high in the air without fear of immediate social ostracization. The dance floor is the public stage for a private revolution, a place where the old rules are swept away by the joyful, chaotic rhythm of a new generation. It's where the chaperone's demise truly becomes a physical reality, and where the language of romance is written not with words, but with a dizzying blur of arms and legs. The dance floor is alive with the sound of jazz, and you're feeling the exhilarating rush of this new, chaotic world. But for all the revolutionary changes of the flapper era, one thing remains constant: the importance of the male figure. The kind of man who would make a flapper's heart flutter was also undergoing a radical transformation. He wasn't the staid, respectable suitor of the past. He was the sheikh, and his name was Rudolph Valentino. A mainstream historical fact is that the silent film star Rudolph Valentino was the ultimate male idol of the 1920s. With his slick-back hair, smoldering gaze, and exotic charm, he embodied a new kind of masculinity. In films like The Sheik 1921, he played an aloof, dominant, and deeply passionate romantic hero who would sweep a woman off her feet, whether she wanted it or not. The image of the Sheik was born a man who was passionate, a little dangerous, and utterly captivating. This was a direct rejection of the old Victorian ideal of manhood, which prized stoicism, hard work, and a kind of respectable dullness. The Sheik, by contrast, was a figure of pure, unadulterated passion. He wasn't a man you brought home to meet your parents. He was a man you met in a shadowy speakeasy. He was the fantasy, the escape from the mundane reality of a life that was still, for many, full of restrictions. The Sheik, with his dark eyes and his dangerous charm, was the perfect complement to the flapper's rebellious spirit. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that the image of the Sheik sparked a hilarious moral panic among some men who felt that Valentino's popularity was a sign of the effeminization of American manhood. They feared that American men were losing their rugged, masculine edge and becoming too soft, too polished, and too interested in their own looks. This led to a wave of articles in magazines and newspapers, with some writers openly mocking the idea of men trying to imitate Valentino. It was a fascinating glimpse into the anxiety that these new social shifts were causing, not just for women, but for men as well. Historians still argue whether the Sheik was a truly new kind of man or just a new kind of fantasy. Was the Sheik a real person, or was he just a figment of a generation's imagination? A romantic ideal that was impossible to live up to in real life. The fact is, the Sheik represented a man who could match a flapper's energy and passion. He was an equal partner in the dance of rebellion, not a stuffy old suitor who was just looking for a good wife. The Sheik was a man who understood that a woman was not just a possession, but a partner in adventure. This new male ideal had a direct impact on dating etiquette. Young men began to adopt the Sheik's look, the slicked-back hair, the slightly disheveled look, the brooding intensity. They learned to be a little more forward, a little more adventurous, and a little less concerned with what their parents thought. The Sheik was the hero of a new story, a story where romance was less about duty and more about desire. So, as you look around the speakeasy, you're not just seeing a room full of people. You're seeing a room full of new archetypes, of flappers and sheiks, of rebels and romantics. The sheik is the male counterpoint to your own rebellion. A man who is ready to meet you on the dance floor and in the back of a car. A man who understands that this new world is for the bold, the beautiful, and the brave. The sheik is the fantasy. But he's also a sign that the men of this generation are just as ready to break free from the old rules as the women are. You're out on a date, but it's not just the two of you. This new world, with its fluid rules and its group-oriented fun, has given rise to a new kind of social event, the necking party. A mainstream historical fact is that these parties were a common social ritual among flappers and their male counterparts, a way for young people to engage in physical intimacy in a group setting. It was a kind of controlled chaos, a public-private space where couples could get to know each other physically without the full pressure of a one-on-one date. The idea of a necking party is pretty simple. A group of friends, maybe a handful of couples, would all go out together, often to a secluded spot in the countryside or a house that was free from parental supervision. The evening would typically involve a lot of music, dancing, and of course, the new illegal cocktails we talked about. But the main event was the necking, the collective act of couples engaging in petting, sometimes in the same room. It was a social experience that normalized physical intimacy, turning what was once a scandalous private act into a public, albeit secretive, group activity. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that these parties were often discussed in hushed tones in newspapers and magazines, with moralists using terms like petting parties to describe what they saw as the ultimate sign of the breakdown of traditional values. The term necking itself, which was a new term for kissing and making out, was used to paint a picture of a generation of young people who were more interested in physical pleasure than in emotional connection. It's a great example of how the language we use to describe social trends can often be a reflection of our own anxieties. Historians still argue whether necking parties were truly a sign of a new, more sexually liberated society, or if they were just a sign of a generation that was a bit confused about the new rules. Was the public nature of these parties a way to make sure no one went too far, with the group serving as an unofficial, peer-enforced chaperone? Or was it just a way to make a private act seem more socially acceptable? It's a fascinating question. The group dynamic of a necking party could be both a source of pressure to conform and a source of social safety, depending on the people involved. The necking party also reflects a broader shift from the private, family-centric life of the past to a more public, peer-centric life. Your friends were no longer just your companions. They were your moral compass, your social arbiters, and your accomplices. The opinions of your parents mattered less than the opinions of your peers, and the necking party was the ultimate proof of this new social order. It was a world where you were judged not by how you behaved in your family's parlor, but by how you behaved in a room full of your friends. So, as you find yourself at a necking party, the music playing in the background and the air thick with excitement, you are participating in a social experiment. You're not just on a date with one person, you're on a date with a whole new social scene. It's a world of group dynamics, of shared secrets, and of a new, more casual approach to physical intimacy. The necking party is the ultimate expression of the flapper era, a chaotic, exhilarating, and slightly bewildering blend of public and private, of innocence and rebellion, all rolled into one thrilling night. The necking party is still fresh in your mind, a blur of jazz music and whispered secrets. But let's rewind a little bit, because many of these social revolutions didn't start in the speakeasies or on the dance floor. They began, of all places, on the college campus. A mainstream historical fact is that universities became a crucial battleground for the changing social mores of the 1920s, a kind of petri dish where new forms of courtship and social interaction were tested and refined. Before the 1920s, college was a very different place. It was highly segregated by gender, and the social interactions between young men and women were often formal and heavily supervised. But in the flapper era, a new coeducational model was emerging, and with it came an explosion of social opportunities. Colleges became a kind of temporary escape from the watchful eyes of family, a 4-year window of freedom where young people could experiment with new identities and new ways of relating to each other. This new freedom gave rise to a whole new set of college rituals. Fraternities and sororities, which had existed before, took on a new social importance, becoming the hubs of campus social life. The parties, dances, and get-togethers they hosted were the new dating venues, the modern equivalent of the old parlor, but with a lot more jazz music and a lot less supervision. A quirky or fringe tidbit is that college students of the era had their own unique slang to describe their social lives, with terms like pash for a passionate romance and smooth for a popular person. It was a whole new language for a whole new generation. Historians still argue whether the college scene of the 1920s was truly a microcosm of the larger social changes, or if it was just a temporary bubble, a kind of 4-year hiatus from the more traditional expectations of the real world. Did the experiences of these students reflect the reality of dating for the majority of young people? Or were they just a privileged few who had the luxury of a prolonged adolescence? It's a great question, and the answer is likely a bit of both. The college campus was certainly a more permissive environment than most family homes, but the social norms and behaviors that started there often filtered out into the wider world. The college campus also became a testing ground for the new dating etiquette. This was where the concepts of dating and necking were refined, where young men and women learned to navigate the new, ambiguous rules of romance. The pressure to be popular, to have a steady stream of dates, and to be seen at all the right parties was intense. It was a kind of social training ground, a place where you learned how to be a flapper or a chic before you had to do it in the real world. The role of the automobile, which we talked about before, was particularly important on the college campus. With a car, a young couple could escape the confines of campus and its social pressures, driving to a secluded spot for some privacy. The car was a symbol of freedom, and on a college campus, where rules and curfews were still a part of life, that freedom was even more intoxicating. The car was an escape pod, a place where you could be yourself, even if just for a little while. So, as you imagine the ivy-covered halls and manicured lawns of a 1920s university, you're not just seeing a place of learning, you're seeing a place of social experimentation, a place where the old rules were being challenged and the new rules were being written. The college campus was where the flapper was born, and it was where a new generation learned to flirt, to love, and to rebel, all in the span of a single, exhilarating decade. The college campus was a hotbed of change, and the social rituals that emerged there were the blueprint for flapper dating etiquette. But there was another piece of technology that was quietly, but profoundly, changing the way you communicated. It was that strange, black device on the wall, the one with the curly cord and the bell that would ring at the most inconvenient times, the telephone was. A mainstream historical fact is that the widespread adoption of the telephone in the 1920s fundamentally altered the dating landscape. Before this, communication was slow and formal. You'd write a letter or a short note, or you'd have to make an in-person visit. This meant that every interaction was a planned event, with plenty of time for you and your parents to think and prepare. The telephone, however, was instantaneous. It allowed for spontaneous plans, last-minute changes, and perhaps most importantly, private conversations. You could call a date and make plans for the evening without having to go through a chaperone or a watchful parent. It was a direct line to a social life that was entirely your own. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the telephone also created a new kind of social anxiety. What were the rules of telephone etiquette? Was it okay for a girl to call a boy? Was it rude to call late at night? These were questions that previous generations never had to consider, and they were hotly debated in etiquette columns in women's magazines. The telephone was a powerful tool, but it was also a social minefield, and a wrong move could be a sign of a lack of class or breeding. It's a bit like today's anxiety over when to text, when to call, and what a read receipt really means. Historians still argue whether the telephone's influence was primarily positive or negative. Did it enable more honest, personal communication? Or did it just make it easier for young people to deceive their parents and escape from their social obligations? It's a good question. The telephone was a tool of both liberation and deception. It allowed a flapper to make her own plans, but it also made it easier for her to keep those plans a secret. The telephone was a private line in a world that was still very public, and that privacy was a precious commodity. The telephone also changed the nature of flirtation. Before, flirting was a visual, in-person game of glances and subtle body language. With the telephone, you had to learn to flirt with your voice. The long, rambling, semi-flirtatious conversations that we take for granted today were a new phenomenon. It was a new way to get to know someone, to hear their voice and their laughter, and to build a kind of intimacy that was not dependent on physical presence. So, as you reach for the receiver, you're not just making a phone call, you're using a tool that is fundamentally rewriting the rules of courtship. The telephone is the invisible thread that connects all the other elements of flapper dating etiquette. It's the way you make a date to go to a speakeasy, the way you make plans to drive out in a car, and the way you connect with your friends to go to a necking party. It's the silent, constant hum in the background of a generation that is constantly on the move. And it's a testament to the power of technology to fundamentally change the way we live and love. The telephone hums in your ear, the voice on the other end using a vocabulary that would be utterly baffling to your parents. That's because with this new generation and its new rules came a whole new language. A mainstream historical fact is that the flapper era was defined by its vibrant, playful, and often confusing slang. This wasn't just a handful of new words. It was a complete dialect, a secret language that separated the in-crowd from the stuffy old world they were rebelling against. Terms like cat's meow and bee's knees were used to describe something wonderful or a particularly attractive person. A woman who was a lot of fun was the real McCoy, and a man who was popular was the big cheese. To be ritzy was to be elegant or fashionable, and if you were all wet, you were completely wrong. This slang was fast-paced, witty, and constantly evolving, a reflection of the fast-paced, constantly evolving world you were living in. It was a way of showing that you were in the know, that you were part of the club, and that you weren't an old fogey. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some of the slang was directly tied to the new dating etiquette. To neck with someone was to kiss them passionately, a term that became synonymous with the new, more physical form of courtship. To be on the lam meant you were on the run, which was an apt description for a generation that was constantly escaping the old rules. And to call someone the berries was to say they were the best, the most attractive person in the room. This slang was not just for fun, it was a functional part of the dating ritual, a way of communicating your intentions and your feelings without having to use the old, formal language of courtship. Historians still argue whether this slang was a genuine form of cultural expression or if it was just a fad, a temporary linguistic quirk that was bound to fade away. Was the slang of the flapper era a sign of a new, more expressive and playful generation? Or was it just a way for young people to create a temporary sense of belonging in a world that felt increasingly anonymous? It's a great question. The slang was a way of creating a community, a shared identity, and it was a powerful tool for social cohesion. This new vocabulary had a direct impact on the dating scene. It was a way to flirt, to signal interest, and to show off your wit. You could compliment a woman by telling her she was the berries or the cat's pajamas, and it was a lot more charming and a lot less formal than telling her she was a fair maiden. The slang was a kind of verbal code, a way for two people to connect on a level that was entirely their own. It was a language of rebellion, a language of fun, and a language of love. So, as you find yourself in a speakeasy or on a dance floor, listening to the conversation swirling around you, you're not just hearing a bunch of new words, you're hearing a new generation find its voice. The flapper slang is the sound of a cultural revolution, a linguistic rebellion that is just as important as the rebellion of fashion and dance. It's a language that says, we're not like our parents, and we're going to talk about love and life in a way that is entirely our own. And in a world that is still trying to catch up, That's a powerful and exhilarating thing. You've got the slang, the clothes, and the new dating spots. But for every movement, there's a face, an icon who embodies the entire spirit of the era. For the flapper, that face was Clara Bow. A mainstream historical fact is that Clara Bow was the quintessential it girl, a silent film star who rose to fame in the mid-1920s and became the living, breathing embodiment of flapper culture. With her short red hair, her playful eyes, and her undeniable magnetism, she was the flapper ideal personified. The concept of it, as coined by the novelist Eleanor Glynn, was a blend of sex appeal, charisma, and a kind of irresistible, playful charm. Clara Bow had it in spades. She wasn't a demure, delicate damsel in distress. She was a whirlwind of energy, a fun-loving, independent young woman who lived for the moment. Her on-screen persona was a revelation for a generation of young women who were tired of the old, restrictive ideals of femininity. She was a flapper on the big screen, and she became a role model for a generation that was looking for a new kind of hero. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that Clara Bow's personal life was almost as scandalous as her on-screen antics. She was known for her wild parties, her multiple love affairs, and her carefree attitude towards social conventions. This personal rebellion only cemented her status as the ultimate flapper. She wasn't just playing a part, she was living it. Her public image blurred the lines between her on-screen characters and her real-life self, and it made her a magnet for both adoration and controversy. She was a celebrity who was not just admired, but emulated. Young women copied her haircut, her makeup, and her irreverent attitude, all in the pursuit of having it. Historians still argue whether Clara Bow and the it girl phenomenon were a sign of a new, more confident generation of women, or if they were just a new, more commercialized form of femininity. Was it a true expression of a woman's personality, or was it just a new kind of brand, a product to be sold to a mass audience? It's a good question. The flapper was a rebel, but she was also a consumer. She bought the clothes, the makeup, and the movie tickets that helped to create the culture she was a part of. The it girl was both a symbol of a cultural revolution and a product of a new, mass media-driven economy. Clara Bow's influence on dating etiquette was profound. She set a new standard for what it meant to be a desirable woman. It wasn't about being a quiet, respectable wife. It was about being a fun, vivacious, and charming companion. A man didn't just want to court you, he wanted to have a good time with you. The it girl was the ultimate prize, and the pursuit of it became a central part of the dating game. Young men wanted to be seen with the most it-ful girl in the room, and young women wanted to be that girl. So, as you apply a little rouge to your cheeks and bob your hair just so, you're not just getting ready for a night out. You're performing an identity, a role that was shaped by the flickering images on a silver screen. Clara Bow, the ultimate it girl, is the invisible ghost in the room, a testament to the power of media to shape our desires and our dating habits. She is the face of the flapper era, and in a very real sense, she is the face of you, a young woman who is ready to take on the world with a little bit of charm, a lot of wit, and an undeniable dash of it. You've embraced the style, the slang, and the attitude of the flapper, and you feel like you're finally an equal partner in this new dating game. But as much as things have changed, some things have stubbornly refused to budge. The world is still operating under a set of unspoken rules, and even in this era of liberation, a double standard persists. A mainstream historical fact is that while young women had more freedom than ever before, they were still judged by a different moral code than their male counterparts. For a young man, a reputation for being a chic, a bit of a womanizer, a little dangerous, and with a string of conquests to his name, was often seen as a sign of his virility and his desirability. It was a kind of badge of honor, a testament to his social prowess. For a young woman, however, a similar reputation was still a one-way ticket to social ruin. A woman who was seen as too free with her affection, who dated too many men, or who was rumored to have gone too far was still labeled as fast or, worse, something far more sinister. The flapper was allowed to flirt, but there was a fine, often invisible line between being a fun-loving rebel and being a woman of ill repute. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that this double standard was often enforced not by parents, but by other young women. There was a kind of informal, peer-enforced policing of reputations. A girl who was seen as going too far might be ostracized from her social group, or her name might be whispered about in hushed tones at a party. This social pressure was a powerful force, and it often meant that while a flapper could act like she was free, she was still a prisoner of her own reputation. It's a great example of how social change can be a messy, uneven process, with the old anxieties and judgments still lingering, even in the most modern of social scenes. Historians still argue whether this double standard was a sign of the ultimate failure of the flapper revolution, or if it was just a natural part of a slow, gradual shift. Was the flapper a true feminist pioneer, or was she just a temporary rebel who was still ultimately trapped by the patriarchal values of her society? It's a great question. The flapper was a woman who was pushing the boundaries, but those boundaries were still very much in place. The double standard was the ultimate proof of this, a constant reminder that while the rules had changed, the game was still fundamentally rigged. This double standard had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It meant that while you could have fun, you had to be careful. You had to be a master of the social game, knowing when to flirt and when to pull back, when to be seen as fun and when to be seen as respectable. You had to learn to navigate a world where your male counterpart could get away with things that you could not, and you had to do it with a smile on your face and a witty retort on your lips. It was a dance, a delicate and often frustrating dance, and the stakes were always higher for you. So, as you light a cigarette with a long, elegant holder and make a witty remark, you are not just being a flapper. You are performing a balancing act, a subtle negotiation between freedom and reputation. The flapper was a rebel, but she was a rebel with a lot to lose. The double standard was the invisible fence that still contained her, a reminder that while the roar of the 20s was loud, it still had a ceiling, a kind of unspoken limit on how far a woman could truly go. And as you'll see, this double standard will continue to play a big part in the anxieties of the era. You're acutely aware of the double standard, a kind of unspoken contract that still governs your social interactions. It's a tension that runs through all of flapper culture, a push and pull between liberation and the lingering morality of the past. This tension is perhaps most evident in the ongoing debate around flapper sexuality. A mainstream historical fact is that the flapper's reputation for being sexually permissive was a major source of anxiety and fascination for both her contemporaries and for historians today. The flapper's public image, short skirts, bobbed hair, and a carefree attitude seem to suggest a complete break from the sexual repression of the Victorian era. The popular media, from magazines to films, painted a picture of a young woman who was not afraid to experiment, to flirt, and to engage in the new, more physical forms of courtship we've been discussing. She was the modern woman, and a part of that modernity was a new, more open approach to her own sexuality. She was seen as someone who was not afraid to enjoy life. And for many people, that implied a kind of sexual freedom that was both thrilling and terrifying. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that college surveys and anecdotal evidence from the 1920s suggested that premarital sex was on the rise, but the numbers were still far from universal. The flapper was more likely to engage in petting and kissing than in full-on intercourse. It was a kind of sexual revolution that was more about boundaries and exploration than about a complete free-for-all. The flapper was a rebel, but she was often a cautious rebel, still aware of the social consequences of her actions. It's a great example of how the public image of a social movement can often be more extreme than the reality on the ground. Historians still argue whether the flapper was truly a sexually liberated woman or if her rebellion was more performative than real. Was her sexual revolution just a change in appearance and attitude, a kind of symbolic break from the past, Or did her newfound freedom of movement and access to private spaces lead to a genuine increase in sexual activity? It's a question that's difficult to answer because so much of the evidence is anecdotal or based on biased sources from the time. The flapper's sexuality was a subject of much debate in her own time, and it remains a subject of debate today. The debate around flapper sexuality had a direct impact on the dating etiquette of the time. The flapper was forced to walk a fine line between being a fun, vivacious companion and being a woman of loose morals. She had to manage the expectations of her male partners, who might assume she was more sexually available than she was, and the judgment of her peers, who might be quick to gossip. It was a kind of social tightrope, and the flapper had to be a master of the performance. She had to project an image of freedom while still adhering to a set of unspoken and often contradictory rules. So, as you find yourself in the back of a car or in a dark corner of a speakeasy, you're not just a person on a date. You're a kind of cultural ambassador, a living symbol of a new era. The flapper's sexuality was the most potent and most controversial part of her identity, and it was a source of both power and peril. It was a sign that she was no longer a passive object of courtship, but an active, desiring subject. And in a world that was still trying to understand what that meant, she was a kind of glorious, exhilarating mystery, a woman who was both a product of her time and a sign of a new world to come. You've just been reminded that your sexuality is a topic of public debate, a constant negotiation between image and reality. This tension is present in every aspect of your life, even in something as seemingly simple as lighting a cigarette. Before the 1920s, smoking in public was considered a deeply unfeminine and scandalous act. It was a habit reserved for men, a symbol of their masculine leisure and power. But now, as a flapper, you find yourself with a cigarette holder in your hand, and you're using it as a prop in the great dating game. A mainstream historical fact is that the flapper era was a time of a massive, industry-driven effort to market cigarettes to women. Cigarette companies, seeing a huge untapped market, launched aggressive ad campaigns that linked smoking with liberation, sophistication, and modernity. Smoking became an accessory, a fashionable prop that was as essential to the flapper's look as her bobbed hair and her short dress. The long, elegant cigarette holder became a quintessential flapper accessory, a way to add a bit of drama and style to the act of smoking. It was a kind of performance, a ritual that announced your independence to the world. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the debate over women smoking was so intense that some cities and towns tried to pass ordinances banning women from lighting up in public. These efforts, much like the attempts to ban the Charleston, were largely unsuccessful, but they do show the moral panic that the sight of a woman with a cigarette could cause. It was a sign of her new, more public role in society, a role that was no longer confined to the home. The cigarette was a kind of a visual shorthand for all the new, scary freedoms that the flapper was embracing. Historians still argue whether the flapper's embrace of smoking was an act of genuine liberation or if it was just a successful marketing campaign. Was the flapper truly asserting her independence, or was she just a pawn in a corporate game to sell more cigarettes? It's a great question. The flapper was a consumer, and her choices were often shaped by the media and the advertising of her time. But even if the initial push came from the cigarette companies, the flapper's adoption of the habit still represented a powerful break from the past. She was claiming a public space and a public habit that had once been exclusively male. The act of smoking also had a direct impact on the dating ritual. It was a kind of social icebreaker, a way to strike up a conversation or to signal interest. A man might offer a woman a light, and that simple act could be a prelude to a longer conversation. The act of sharing a cigarette was a kind of intimacy, a shared moment in the midst of a crowded speakeasy. It was a new way to flirt, to connect, and to signal your membership in a generation that was determined to live life on its own terms. So, as you delicately tap a cigarette from its pack and a man rushes to light it for you, you're not just having a smoke, you're participating in a ritual, a public performance of a new kind of femininity. The cigar was for the men who owned the world, But the cigarette in the long, elegant holder was for the women who were busy taking it over. The smoke curling from your lips is not just a sign of your habit, it's a sign of your rebellion. And it's a constant reminder that for a flapper, even the smallest of acts can be a political statement. The cigarette smoke curls around your head, a testament to your independence. But as you navigate the dating scene, you're also navigating a new set of economic realities. The old system of courtship, where a suitor was vetted for his financial prospects, is gone. In its place, a new, more casual system has emerged, and it has a very specific rule: the man pays. A mainstream historical fact is that the expectation for men to cover the costs of a date became a defining feature of the flapper era, solidifying a dynamic that would last for decades. This was a departure from the old system, where courtship was often a family affair and the financial burden was shared or simply non-existent. But with the shift to public spaces, the movies, the dance halls, the speakeasies, there were now tickets to be bought, cocktails to be purchased, and meals to be had. And in this new world, it was the man who was expected to foot the bill. This wasn't just a matter of chivalry, it was a defining feature of the dating ritual. A man's willingness to spend money on a woman was a sign of his interest, his generosity, and his ability to provide. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that this new economic dynamic created a kind of unspoken social contract. The man's investment, the cost of the dinner, the movie, the taxi ride was often seen as a way of earning a woman's time and attention. A woman, in turn, was expected to give a man her time, her conversation, and perhaps a kiss or two at the end of the night. It was a kind of new, transactional form of courtship, one that was far more explicit about the economics of dating than the old system had been. It's like the pre-Tinder version of a hookup culture, but with more social etiquette and a lot more spending money. Historians still argue whether this new dynamic was empowering for women or if it was just a new form of male dominance. On the one hand, a woman's time and company were being explicitly valued, and she was getting to enjoy a new world of commercial entertainment without having to pay for it. On the other hand, it reinforced the idea that a woman was a kind of prize to be won with money, and that a man's value was still tied to his ability to provide. Was the expectation that the man pays a sign of progress? Or was it a sign that the old gender roles were just being repackaged for a new era? It's a great question, and the answer is likely somewhere in the middle. The new dating economics also created a new kind of social anxiety. What if a man didn't have enough money to take a woman to all the places she wanted to go? What if a woman felt obligated to do something she didn't want to do, just because a man had spent money on her? These were new questions that this generation had to grapple with, and they were often a source of quiet, unspoken tension. The dating scene was a kind of economic minefield, and a wrong move could be a source of embarrassment or social awkwardness. So, as you watch a man pay for a round of drinks, you're not just a person on a date, you're a player in a new economic game. A game that is a bit more transactional and a bit less romantic than the old system of courtship. The expectation for the man to pay is a kind of unwritten rule, a social contract that is just as important as the rule that you should be a fun and witty conversationalist. It's a sign that the world is changing, and that even the most intimate of human relationships are not immune to the forces of a new, consumer-driven economy. The man pays for the drinks, a new, unspoken social contract that solidifies the dating dynamic. But what happens if you don't know the man at all? With the old system of courtship, you would have met him through a family friend, a social club, or at a formal ball. You would have had a shared social circle, and there would have been a kind of pre-vetting process. But in the fast-paced world of the flapper, a new and far more daring form of dating is emerging: the blind date. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of the blind date, in which two people who have never met before go on a date, became a popular phenomenon in the 1920s. This was a direct result of the more casual and spontaneous nature of flapper dating etiquette. With the chaperone gone and the pressure for marriage reduced, dating became more about having a good time and meeting new people. The blind date was the ultimate expression of this new low-stakes approach to romance. It was a way to expand your social circle, to meet someone new and exciting, and to have an adventure without any of the old formal expectations. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the blind date was often set up by friends who saw themselves as matchmakers. The friend would give you a brief description of the person he's a riot, she's a doll, and you would agree to meet, often without knowing what the person even looked like. This was a kind of social experiment, a leap of faith in your friend's judgment. It was a testament to the power of peer influence and the trust that this new generation placed in their friends over their parents. It's a bit like today's dating apps, but with a lot less swiping and a lot more trust in a third-party intermediary. Historians still argue whether the blind date was a sign of a more adventurous, open-minded generation, or if it was just a sign of a society that was becoming more anonymous and disconnected. Was the blind date a fun, harmless way to meet people? Or was it a sign that the old social fabric, which had once been so tight-knit and communal, was starting to fray? It's a great question. The blind date was a product of a world that was becoming bigger, faster, and more impersonal. It was a way to meet someone in a city of millions, but it also meant that you were meeting someone who was a complete and total stranger. The blind date also had a direct impact on the dating ritual itself. There was a new kind of anxiety that came with it. What if the person was not who you expected? What if they were boring? What if there was no chemistry? The blind date was a social gamble, and the stakes were often just a bit higher than a regular date. You had to be a master of the social game, ready to make a quick exit if things weren't going well, or ready to be completely charmed if they were. So, as you find yourself waiting in a crowded restaurant for a person you've never met, you're not just on a date, you're on a kind of social adventure, a product of a new world where a friend's recommendation is more important than a family's approval. The blind date is the ultimate expression of the flapper era's spontaneity in its embrace of the unknown. It's a sign that the world is no longer confined to the people you know, and that the possibilities for romance are as vast and as mysterious as the city itself. It's an act of faith in a world that is still trying to figure out its own rules, and you are right at the heart of it, waiting to see what happens next. The blind date was a thrilling, but also slightly nerve-wracking gamble. You've gambled and won, or at least you've had a decent night, but where did you learn how to flirt? Where did you get the idea that a man should be brooding and a woman should be witty? You got it from the silver screen. A mainstream historical fact is that Hollywood became a powerful blueprint for romantic behavior in the 1920s, shaping expectations of love, attraction, and the very mechanics of a date. Before Hollywood became a dominant cultural force, your ideas about romance would have come from literature, from your family, and from the few formal social occasions you attended. But in the 1920s, the movies became a kind of universal language, a place where an entire generation could learn how to act, talk, and even kiss. The silent films, with their exaggerated gestures and their melodramatic plots, created a kind of template for romantic encounters. You'd watch Clara Bow, the ultimate it girl, on a date with her on-screen chic, and you'd learn what to say, what to wear, and how to hold your body. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some movie theaters of the time would even have etiquette guides in their lobbies, advising young men and women on how to behave on a date. These guides would often be a humorous blend of old-school manners and new-school flapper sensibilities, a kind of social manual for a generation that was making it up as they went along. It's a great example of how a new technology can create a new set of social problems, and how society rushes to create a new set of rules to deal with them. It's the original How to Date manual, and it was a bestseller in every picture palace. Historians still argue whether Hollywood's influence was a good thing for romance. Did it create a new, more exciting and passionate ideal of love? Or did it create unrealistic expectations that no real person could ever live up to? Did the flapper's embrace of the Hollywood romance mean that she was more in love with the idea of love than with an actual person? It's a great question. The movies created a fantasy, a kind of ideal version of a date that was far more dramatic and far more cinematic than anything you would experience in real life. It was a kind of romantic escapism, and it was a powerful force in the lives of a generation that was still trying to figure out what it wanted. The movies also had a direct impact on dating etiquette. The act of going to the movies was a date in and of itself, and it created a new kind of social ritual. You would sit in the dark, next to your date, and you would share a kind of silent, intimate experience. The movies were a common ground, a shared cultural reference that you could talk about after the show. It was a new way to connect, to find common ground, and to build a kind of intimacy that was not dependent on constant conversation. The movie theater was a new kind of social space, a place where you could learn about romance and experience it all at the same time. So, as you walk out of a movie theater with your date, the flickering images of a romantic comedy still playing in your mind, you are not just a person on a date, you are a product of Hollywood, a person who has learned how to flirt, how to kiss, and how to fall in love from the greatest romantic teachers of the age. The movies are the invisible curriculum of a generation, a powerful force that is shaping the way you think about and the way you act on your desires. The silver screen is not just a source of entertainment, it is the ultimate dating guide, and you are following its every rule, one romantic gesture at a time. The movie credits have rolled, and the romantic fantasy of the silver screen is still humming in your head. But for a true taste of the 1920s, for the raw, unscripted energy of the era, you need to find a different kind of venue. You need to find a jazz club. A mainstream historical fact is that the jazz club, with its live music, its crowded tables, and its electric atmosphere, was a quintessential dating spot for the flapper generation, a place where all the elements of the new dating etiquette came together in a glorious, chaotic swirl. The jazz club was a sensory experience. The air was thick with the scent of cigarette smoke and cheap perfume. The music, that new, syncopated, improvisational sound, was a physical force, a constant, driving rhythm that compelled you to move. The lights were low, the tables were close together, and the whole room seemed to be buzzing with a kind of intoxicating, rebellious energy. This wasn't a place for quiet conversation or polite small talk. It was a place for flirting, for dancing, and for falling in love to the sound of a saxophone. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that jazz music was also the subject of a hilarious moral panic. Older generations saw it as the devil's music, a primitive, animalistic sound that was a direct threat to the morals of young people. They feared that the music's syncopated rhythms and improvisational nature would lead to a similar lack of restraint in the lives of the young people who listened to it. It's a great example of how a generation's fears can be projected onto its art, with the jazz music being blamed for all the social changes that were already happening. Historians still argue whether jazz music was a cause of the flapper revolution or if it was just a soundtrack for a revolution that was already underway. Did the music itself inspire a new sense of freedom and rebellion? Or did the flapper generation just adopt the music that best reflected their own, already existing values? It's a great question, and the answer is likely a bit of both. The music was a powerful cultural force, and it was a direct reflection of the new, more improvisational, and more individualistic approach to life that the flapper generation was embracing. The jazz club also had a direct impact on the dating ritual. It was a place where you could connect with a person on a different level. You could talk, but you could also just listen to the music together, a kind of shared, intimate experience that didn't require constant conversation. The music was the glue that held the night together, the constant driving force that was the backdrop for a new romance. It was a place where you could dance, but you could also just sit and watch the other people, a kind of cultural performance that was both thrilling and a little voyeuristic. So, as you sip a clandestine cocktail and listen to the mournful wail of a saxophone, you're not just a person on a date, you're a part of a cultural moment, a member of a generation that is finding its voice and its rhythm in the pulsating heart of the jazz club. The music is the constant, intoxicating hum in the background of your life. and it is the perfect soundtrack for a generation that is constantly on the move, constantly in search of a new kind of freedom and a new kind of love. The jazz club is more than just a venue. It's a sanctuary for a generation that is making up its own rules, one syncopated beat at a time. The jazz club is humming with life, the music a constant, intoxicating presence. But even in this seemingly carefree world, there's an undercurrent of anxiety, a kind of unspoken fear that can turn a romantic night into a source of dread. We're talking about the fear of STIs, or, as they were called in the parlance of the day, venereal diseases. A mainstream historical fact is that, with the rise of more casual dating and premarital intimacy, the fear of sexually transmitted infections, particularly syphilis and gonorrhea, became a new and profound source of anxiety for the flapper generation. Before this, the old, strict system of courtship was, for all its flaws, a kind of bulwark against the spread of these diseases. The emphasis on abstinence and marriage meant that the risk was, in theory, confined to a married couple. But with the flapper's embrace of petting and a more casual, serial dating culture, the risk of infection became a new and very real part of the dating landscape. This wasn't something you could talk about openly, of course. It was a silent, terrifying anxiety, a kind of ghost in the machine of the dating ritual. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the fear of STIs was often used by moralists and public health officials as a way to scare young people back into more traditional dating habits. Pamphlets and posters with graphic images and dire warnings were distributed, painting a picture of a life ruined by a single, casual sexual encounter. The message was clear: this modern lifestyle was dangerous, and the only way to stay safe was to revert to the old ways. It's a great example of how a very real public health crisis can be weaponized for social control. Historians still argue whether the flapper generation was truly ignorant of these risks, or if they were just so enamored with their new freedoms that they chose to ignore them. Was the flapper a naive innocent, blithely unaware of the dangers of her new lifestyle? Or was she a savvy risk-taker, a person who understood the dangers but chose to take the plunge anyway? It's a great question. The information about STIs was not as widely available or as accurate as it is today, but it was not a complete secret either. The fear was a constant presence, a kind of dark cloud hanging over the sunny landscape of the Roaring Twenties. The fear of STIs had a direct impact on the dating ritual. It created a new kind of social pressure, a new set of questions that a flapper had to navigate. How could you know if a person was safe? How could you talk about it without seeming crass or accusatory? The fear of infection was a new, unspoken part of the social contract, a kind of test that was difficult to pass. It was a new layer of complexity in a world that was already a bit confusing. So, as you find yourself in the back of a car or in a dark corner of a speakeasy, the jazz music a little less carefree than it was before, you are not just a person on a date, you are a person in a new, more dangerous world. A world where the stakes are a bit higher and the risks are a bit more profound. The fear of STIs is the ultimate price of the flapper's freedom, a kind of hidden tax on her new, more physical approach to romance. It is a reminder that even in the most exhilarating of times, a ghost of anxiety and a touch of danger can turn a night of fun into a nightmare. The fear of STIs is a hidden, but very real, anxiety. But there's another kind of fear that's also lurking in the background of the dating scene, one that's a bit more economic and a bit less physical. We're talking about the KUL gold digger stereotype. A mainstream historical fact is that with the new, more transactional nature of dating, and with women having more economic independence, a new anxiety emerged for men: the fear of being used for money. The old system of courtship was all about a man's ability to provide. A suitor was expected to have good financial prospects, and a woman's family would vet him for his ability to take care of her. But in the flapper era, the dynamic was a bit different. The woman had her own money from working, but the man was still expected to pay for all the dates, the movies, the meals, the clandestine cocktails. This new dynamic created a new kind of suspicion. Was a woman genuinely interested in a man for his personality and his charm? Or was she just interested in him for his money, for the fun and the entertainment he could provide? A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the gold digger stereotype was often played for laughs in movies and magazines, with cartoons and stories about men being fleeced by wily young women. The stereotype was a kind of social release valve, a way for men to voice their anxieties about a world where women were no longer a passive, dependent part of the dating ritual. It was a kind of cultural paranoia, a fear that the new, liberated woman was just a new, more clever kind of fortune hunter. Historians still argue whether the gold digger was a genuine phenomenon or if it was just a sexist stereotype born of male anxiety. Were flappers truly using men for their money, or was this just a fear that was projected onto them by a generation of men who were feeling a little insecure about their new, less dominant role in the dating game? It's a great question. The flapper was a consumer, and she was a woman who enjoyed her independence. She was also a person who lived for the moment, and that often meant going to the most expensive and most exciting places in town. Whether that meant she was a gold digger is a matter of perspective, but the fear was real, and it had a profound impact on the dating ritual. The fear of the gold digger had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It created a kind of new, unspoken test that a flapper had to pass. She had to show that she was not just interested in a man for his money, but for his personality, his wit, and his charm. She had to be a fun and engaging conversationalist, not just a silent, pretty companion. The onus was on her to prove that she was not a stereotype, and that the date was a genuine meeting of two people, not a transaction. So, as you accept a man's offer to pay for a round of drinks, you're not just a person on a date, you're a kind of cultural representative, a person who is trying to prove that the new, more independent woman is not a threat, but an equal. The gold digger stereotype is the ghost in the room, a constant, unspoken reminder that even in this new world, some of the old anxieties and judgments are still lurking. It is a sign that the revolution is not yet complete, and that even a small act of generosity can be fraught with a much larger meaning. The fear of the gold digger is a testament to the new anxieties of a world in flux. But let's rewind a bit to the very purpose of dating itself. Before the flapper era, the goal of courtship was clear and unwavering: marriage. You dated with the express purpose of finding a spouse, and every social interaction was a step toward that ultimate goal. A good suitor was a good husband in waiting, and a woman's value was often tied to her ability to land a good one. A mainstream historical fact is that in the 1920s, for the first time, dating became a kind of end in itself, a form of entertainment that was no longer solely a prelude to marriage and family. This was a profound shift in the cultural landscape. The flapper, with her bobbed hair and her carefree attitude, was not just a girl looking for a husband. She was a girl looking for a good time, a good conversation, and a good dance. She was a person who was living for the moment, and marriage, while still a possibility, was no longer the only, or even the primary, goal. This was a direct result of the new economic and social freedoms that women were experiencing. With more women working and living independently, they were no longer financially dependent on a husband, and that gave them the freedom to date for fun. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that college students often engaged in what they called dating for popularity. The goal was not to find a spouse, but to have a busy social calendar, to be seen with a lot of different people, and to be considered a smooth or swell person. It was a kind of social competition, a game of who could have the most fun and be the most popular, and it had very little to do with the long-term goal of marriage. This was a new and very modern approach to romance, one that was far more focused on the present than on the future. Historians still argue whether this shift from a marriage focus was a sign of a healthier approach to relationships, or if it was a sign of a more superficial one. Did the flapper's embrace of dating for fun mean that she was more likely to find a compatible partner, a person she genuinely liked? Or did it mean that she was just going from person to person, never truly committing? It's a great question. The old system, for all its flaws, at least had a clear, defined goal. The new system, with its emphasis on fun and spontaneity, was a bit more ambiguous, and that ambiguity could be both exhilarating and a little bit terrifying. The shift from marriage focus had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It meant that a date was no longer a formal meeting with a specific purpose. It was a casual outing, a way to pass the time and have some fun. The pressure was off, and that allowed for a kind of playful, low-stakes flirtation that would have been impossible in the old system. The flapper was not trying to impress a suitor's family. She was just trying to have a good time with him, and that made all the difference in the world. So, as you find yourself on a date, you are not a person on a mission. You are a person on an adventure, a person who is living for the moment. The flapper's shift from a marriage focus is the ultimate expression of her rebellious spirit. It is a sign that she is no longer a prisoner of her own reproductive destiny, but a person who is free to live and love on her own terms. It's a testament to the power of a new generation to redefine the very purpose of romance and to find a new kind of joy in the simple act of having fun. The shift from a marriage-focused courtship to a fun-focused dating culture was a huge change, but it didn't happen in a vacuum. You have a whole generation of parents and moralists watching this new world unfold, and they are not happy about it. The older generation's reaction to the flapper and her dating etiquette was a mixture of outrage, confusion, and genuine fear. A mainstream historical fact is that the media of the time was filled with op-eds and sermons from older people who saw the flapper as a symbol of the decline of traditional values and the moral decay of a nation. For the older generation, the flapper was an alien creature. She dressed in a way that was shockingly immodest. She smoked cigarettes in public. She drank illegal alcohol. She danced to jungle music. And, perhaps most horrifying of all, she went on dates with men without a chaperone. For a generation that had grown up with a very specific, very rigid set of rules about how men and women should interact, the flapper was a direct assault on everything they held dear. She was a sign that their world was ending, and they were not going to go quietly. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some parents would try to use veiled threats and guilt to rein in their children's behavior. They would talk about how their daughter was going to get a bad reputation, or how she was going to have trouble finding a good husband. These were not idle threats. In a world that was still very judgmental, a bad reputation could be a very real social and economic liability. The parents were trying to use the old rules to control a new world that no longer respected them, and it was a source of constant tension and generational conflict. Historians still argue whether the older generation's outrage was a sign of genuine moral concern, or if it was just a fear of losing control. Were they truly worried about the morals of their children, or were they just afraid of a world that they no longer understood? It's a great question. The older generation's reaction was a kind of social panic, a feeling that the world was spinning out of control, but it was also a sign that the flapper generation's rebellion was working. The flapper was getting a reaction, and that reaction was a testament to the power of her defiance. The older generation's reaction had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It meant that dating was a kind of secret life, a world that was kept separate from the world of the family. You would have to lie about where you were going, who you were with, and what you were doing. The car, the telephone, and the speakeasy were all tools of this deception, a way to keep your dating life a secret from the people who were most likely to disapprove of it. It was a kind of constant, low-grade warfare, and the flapper was a soldier in that war. So, as you sneak out of your family home, careful not to wake your parents. You are not just a person on a date. You are a rebel, a person who is actively defying the people who raised you. The outrage of the older generation is the invisible enemy in the background of your life, a constant, nagging reminder that your new freedoms come at a cost. The flapper was not just a symbol of a new kind of fun. She was a symbol of a new kind of generational conflict, a conflict that would define the era, and you, my friend, are right in the middle of it. You've managed to sneak out of the house, a small act of rebellion that speaks volumes about the generational conflict raging around you. You're meeting your date, and you've taken a little extra time to get ready. You've applied some rouge to your cheeks and some color to your lips. You're wearing makeup. And in this new world, that is a huge deal. A mainstream historical fact is that the flapper era marked a massive cultural shift in the role of content beauty products. Before the 1920s, makeup was largely associated with prostitutes and actresses, and it was considered a deeply immodest and unsophisticated habit for a respectable woman. But now, a new industry is emerging, fueled by the flapper's desire to look modern and to be attractive. Cosmetics, from face powder to lipstick, are being sold to the masses, and they are being marketed as a way to enhance your natural beauty, not to hide it. The flapper's makeup was subtle, but it was also a kind of public statement. The dark lipstick, the rouged cheeks, the kohl-lined eyes, it was a look that announced your modernity and your independence. It was a new kind of war paint, a way to show that you were a player in the new dating game. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the debate over makeup was so intense that some women's magazines would run articles on how to apply makeup discreetly, so as not to offend your parents or your social betters. The idea was to look naturally beautiful, even if it took a lot of work. The flapper was a master of this kind of performance, a woman who looked effortless and carefree, even though she was often meticulously manicured and styled. It's a great example of how a new social trend can be a source of both liberation and new, subtle social anxieties. Historians still argue whether the flapper's embrace of beauty products was a sign of a new, more confident generation of women, or if it was just a sign of a new, more commercialized and superficial form of femininity. Was makeup a tool of empowerment, a way for a woman to control her own image? Or was it just a new form of social pressure, a new standard of beauty that women had to live up to? It's a great question. The flapper was a consumer, and her choices were often shaped by a powerful, new advertising industry. But even if the initial push came from the companies, the flapper's adoption of makeup still represented a powerful break from the past. The use of makeup had a direct impact on the dating ritual. It was a way to flirt, to signal interest, and to show off your personality. The dark lipstick and the kohl-lined eyes were a kind of visual language, a way to say, I am a modern, confident, and beautiful woman, and I am here to have a good time. It was a new way to get a man's attention, to catch his eye from across a crowded room, and to start a conversation that might lead to something more. So, as you apply a little bit of powder to your nose and a little bit of color to your lips, you are not just getting ready for a night out. You are participating in a cultural revolution, a revolution of beauty, of fashion, and of identity. The flapper's embrace of beauty products is a sign that she is not just a woman to be courted, she is a woman to be admired. It is a testament to the power of a new generation to redefine the very meaning of beauty, and to find a new kind of joy in the simple act of looking good. And in this new world, looking good is the ultimate act of rebellion. The rouge on your cheeks is a quiet, but powerful, act of defiance. You're ready for your date, and you're part of a generation that has earned a new nickname, a nickname that captures both its passion and its perceived danger. We're talking about the flaming youth. A mainstream historical fact is that this term, used by both the flapper generation and their disapproving elders, was a kind of universal catch-all for a generation that was seen as wild, passionate, and dangerously out of control. The term flaming youth was a direct reference to F.V. Scott Fitzgerald's 1922 short story collection of the same name, and it became a kind of cultural shorthand for a generation that was living life at a breakneck pace. The flame was a reference to both their burning passion for life and their perceived recklessness. They were seen as a generation that was burning bright and fast, a generation that was not afraid to take risks and to live for the moment, even if it meant a potential social or moral burnout. The term captured both the excitement and the anxiety that this new generation was causing. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the flaming youth nickname was often used with a kind of delicious irony by the flapper generation themselves. They knew they were being talked about, and they leaned into the stereotype, using it as a kind of badge of honor. To be flaming was to be cool, to be in the know, and to be a part of the most exciting cultural movement of the decade. It's a great example of how a derogatory term can be reclaimed and used as a source of pride by the very people it was meant to mock. Historians still argue whether the flaming youth were truly as reckless as their name suggested, or if it was just a kind of performance. Was the flapper a genuine rebel, or was she just playing a part that had been written for her by the media and the culture? It's a great question. The flapper was a woman who was pushing the boundaries, but she was still a woman of her time. Her rebellion was real, but it was also a product of a specific historical moment, a moment that was a unique blend of new freedoms and old anxieties. The Flaming Youth nickname had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It created a kind of new expectation for romance. A date was no longer a quiet, polite affair. It was an adventure, a whirlwind of jazz, dancing, and illicit cocktails. The flapper and her chic were expected to live up to the name, to be passionate, to be a little dangerous, and to be a little bit out of control. It was a new kind of social pressure, a pressure to be exciting, to be cool, and to be a part of the flame. So, as you find yourself in the back of a car or on a crowded dance floor, you are not just a person on a date, you are a member of the Flaming Youth, a person who is living life at a breakneck pace. The nickname is the invisible soundtrack to your life, a constant reminder that you are a part of a generation that is burning bright and fast. It is a sign that the old world is ending and that a new world, a world of passion and rebellion, is just beginning. And you, my friend, are one of the sparks that is helping to light the fire. The nickname Flaming Youth burns bright in the background, a kind of glorious, chaotic soundtrack to your life. And as a member of this new generation, you're not content with just walking or taking public transportation. You need to move, and you need to move fast. And for that, there's only one real vehicle, the Charleston Roadster. A mainstream historical fact is that the Roadster, a two-seater convertible, became a powerful symbol of independence and romantic possibility for the flapper generation. Before this, the family car was a kind of communal vehicle, a thing you shared with your parents and your siblings. It was a tool for family outings, not a vehicle for romantic escapades. But the Roadster was different. It was a car designed for two people, for a young couple who wanted to be alone. The open top, the low-slung design, and the general feeling of speed and adventure made it the perfect car for a generation that was in a hurry to get to the future. It was the ultimate anti-chaperone device, a car that was literally designed to be a private, mobile cocoon for a young couple. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the Roadster's design often included a small, external rumble seat in the back, a kind of extra seat for a friend or a chaperone. But in the context of a two-seater car, the rumble seat was a kind of a hilarious compromise, a kind of polite nod to the old ways while the real action was happening in the front seat. It was a great example of how the new world was often a kind of a polite, but ultimately insincere, nod to the old world, a way of giving lip service to the rules while completely ignoring them. Historians still argue whether the Roadster was a cause of the flapper revolution or if it was just a symbol of it. Did the car itself give young people the freedom they were craving? Or did they just adopt the car that best reflected their own, already existing values? It's a great question, and the answer is likely a bit of both. The car was a powerful tool of liberation, but it was also a powerful symbol of a new kind of freedom. The Roadster, with its open top and its wind-in-your-hair feeling, was the perfect car for a generation that was in a hurry to live. The rise of the Roadster also had a direct impact on the dating ritual. A date was no longer just a destination, it was a journey. You could drive to a secluded spot for some privacy, or you could just drive around, talking, laughing, and listening to the rattle of the engine. The car was a new kind of social space, a place where you could be alone together. and that was a precious commodity in a world that was still very public and very judgmental. The car was a place where you could talk, but you could also just be silent, a kind of shared, intimate experience that didn't require constant conversation. So, as you find yourself in the passenger seat of a brand new roadster, the wind whipping through your bobbed hair, you're not just a person on a date, you're a kind of adventurer, a person who is using a new technology to explore a new world. The roadster is a sign that the old rules are gone, and that a new world, a world of speed and freedom and adventure, is just beginning. It's a testament to the power of a new generation to redefine the very meaning of romance and to find a new kind of joy in the simple act of taking a drive. The roar of the roadster's engine is a kind of music, a constant, driving rhythm in the background of your life. But as you speed toward an uncertain future, there are some people who are trying to come up with a new, more radical solution to the problems of dating and commitment. We're talking about the trial marriage debate. A mainstream historical fact is that in the 1920s, some radical thinkers and social reformers began to propose the idea of a temporary, non-binding marriage, sparking a widespread and often hysterical public debate. The idea behind the trial marriage was simple. It was a kind of a practical compromise between the strict, lifelong commitment of traditional marriage and the new, more casual dating culture of the flapper era. The idea was that a couple would enter into a temporary marriage, say for a few years, and at the end of that period, they could either make it permanent or dissolve it without any of the social or legal baggage of a divorce. It was a kind of test run, a way for a couple to see if they were truly compatible before committing to a lifetime together. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the most famous proponent of the trial marriage was the intellectual judge Ben B. Lindsay, a Denver juvenile court judge who wrote a book called The Companionate Marriage. He proposed that couples should be able to get a divorce by mutual consent and that they should be able to have a non-binding trial period before they had children. The idea was to create a new, more honest and more open approach to marriage, one that was based on love and compatibility, not on social pressure or economic necessity. Historians still argue whether the trial marriage debate was a sign of a genuinely progressive social movement or if it was just a kind of intellectual fad that was bound to fail. Was it a realistic solution to the problems of a new, more modern world? Or was it just a utopian fantasy that ignored the deep, cultural roots of marriage? It's a great question. The trial marriage was a direct assault on the traditional idea of marriage as a sacred, lifelong institution. It was a sign that the flapper generation was willing to question everything, even the most fundamental institutions of their society. The trial marriage debate also had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It created a new kind of a conversation that a couple could have. Was this relationship going somewhere? Were they truly compatible? The trial marriage was a new kind of social anxiety, a new set of questions that a couple had to grapple with. It was a sign that the dating ritual was no longer just about fun. It was also about a kind of serious, personal reckoning. So, as you find yourself in a deep conversation with your date, talking about the future and what it might hold, you are not just a person on a date, you are a part of a conversation that is shaping the future of marriage itself. The trial marriage debate is the ultimate sign that the flapper era was not just about short skirts and jazz music. It was about a fundamental reordering of how men and women relate to each other. A reordering that was so profound that it was even changing the very definition of a lifelong commitment. And you, my friend, are right in the middle of it, a part of a generation that is willing to question everything, even the very nature of love itself. The debate over trial marriage is a profound, if a little heady, part of the era's intellectual landscape. But let's bring it back down to the ground, to the gritty, smoke-filled reality of the speakeasy. You're in a crowded room, the air thick with perfume and illegal gin, and you're surrounded by the sounds of a live jazz band. But who is the person who is really running this place? Who is the person who is making sure the music is good, the drinks are flowing, and the atmosphere is just right? It's the speakeasy host. A mainstream historical fact is that the host, often the owner of the illicit establishment, served as a kind of informal social gatekeeper, a person who decided who was in and who was out. The speakeasy host was a new kind of social figure, a person who was not a part of the old, traditional elite. They were often ex-boxers, mobsters, or just savvy business people who saw an opportunity in the new illegal economy. But in the world of the speakeasy, they were the ultimate arbiters of cool. They decided who got in, who got the best table, and who was allowed to rub shoulders with the celebrities and the movers and shakers of the new world. To be in the good graces of the speakeasy host was to be in the know, to be a part of the real action. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some speakeasy hosts would have a kind of secret password that they would change every night. You would have to know a person who knew a person who knew the password. And that secret knowledge was a kind of a social currency. It was a new kind of social system, one that was based not on who your parents were, but on who you knew, on who you were seen with. It's a great example of how the new world was creating its own new social hierarchies, ones that were a direct rebuke to the old class-based system. Historians still argue whether the speakeasy host was a genuine force for social change or if they were just a new kind of a gatekeeper, a person who was just replacing the old class-based system with a new, equally exclusive one. Was the speakeasy host a kind of a democratic figure, a person who was creating a new world where everyone could belong? Or were they just creating a new kind of an exclusive club, a club that was just as hard to get into as the old traditional ones? It's a great question. The speakeasy host was a symbol of a new, more fluid social world, but they were also a testament to the fact that even in a world of rebels, there are still rules, and there are still people who are in charge. The speakeasy host also had a direct impact on dating etiquette. They were a kind of a new, informal chaperone, a person who would make sure that things didn't get too out of hand. They would often keep an eye on the couples in their club, making sure that everyone was having a good time, but also making sure that everyone was behaving in a way that was appropriate for their establishment. The host was a kind of a new social authority, a person who had to be respected, and a person who could either make or break your night. So, as you find yourself in a speakeasy, you are not just a person on a date, you are a person in a new, private social world, a world that is run by its own rules and its own people. The speakeasy host is the ultimate symbol of this new world, a person who is both a product of the rebellion and a manager of it. He is a testament to the fact that even in a world of chaos and change, there are still people who are in charge, and that even the most rebellious of generations still needs a kind of a leader. And in this new world, the speakeasy host is the person who is really calling the shots. The speakeasy host is the new social authority, a kind of underground chaperone who makes sure the party keeps humming. But the party isn't just in the speakeasy. It's spilling out into the streets, into the public squares, and into the most bizarre of venues. We're talking about the dance marathon craze. A mainstream historical fact is that in the 1920s, dance marathons became a popular form of public entertainment, with couples dancing for days, sometimes weeks on end, for a chance to win a cash prize. The dance marathon was a kind of a bizarre social experiment, a place where people would push their bodies to the absolute limit in a public spectacle of endurance and exhaustion. For the flapper generation, it was a kind of a glorious, masochistic performance, a way to show off their toughness and their rebellious spirit. A couple would sign up for a dance marathon, and they would dance for days, with only short breaks for sleeping and eating. The last couple standing would win a cash prize, and they would become a kind of local celebrity, a symbol of the toughness and the resilience of the new generation. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the rules of the dance marathon were often a bit vague, leading to some truly bizarre social dynamics. Couples would often get into fights, would often fall asleep on their feet, and would often get into a kind of a trance-like state. It was a kind of a public spectacle of human endurance and human suffering, and it was a source of both fascination and disgust for the people who watched it. It's a great example of how a new form of entertainment can become a kind of a dark, strange mirror of a society's anxieties and its desires. Historians still argue whether the dance marathons were a genuine form of entertainment or if they were just a kind of a dark, exploitative spectacle. Were the people who were participating in them doing it for the love of the dance? Or were they doing it out of a desperate need for money and fame? It's a great question. The dance marathon was a product of a world that was both a little bit more free and a little bit more desperate. It was a place where a person could become a star, but it was also a place where a person could lose their mind. The dance marathon also had a direct impact on the dating ritual. A couple who was dancing together for weeks on end would often get into a kind of a deep, intimate relationship. They would learn to read each other's bodies, to anticipate each other's movements, and to support each other through the most difficult of times. The dance marathon was a kind of a crash course in a relationship, a place where a couple could get to know each other on a level that was far deeper and far more intimate than a normal date. It was a kind of a romantic endurance test, and the couples who survived it would often become a couple for life. So, as you watch a couple dancing on a stage, their eyes glazed over with exhaustion and their bodies swaying to the music, you are not just a person watching a dance. You are a person watching a kind of a bizarre, romantic social experiment. The dance marathon is the ultimate expression of the flapper era's love of spectacle and its fascination with the human body. It is a sign that the new world is a place where a person can be a star, but it is also a place where a person can be a victim. It is a kind of a dark, strange mirror of a generation that is both wildly alive and dangerously close to burning out. The dance marathon is a bizarre spectacle of human endurance, a kind of fever dream that reflects the strange, new anxieties of the era. But let's take a step back and remember how we got here. The flapper, the speakeasy, the jazz clubs, the roadsters, none of this would have been possible without the seismic cultural shift that was set in motion a few years earlier. We're talking, of course, about the Great War. A mainstream historical fact is that the trauma, loss, and societal shakeup of World War I paved the way for the radical changes of the 1920s, a period of giddy hedonism that was, in many ways, a direct reaction to the horrors of the battlefield. For the generation that came of age in the 1920s, the war was a defining event. They had seen a world of rigid social codes and old-world power structures descend into a bloody, pointless conflict that killed millions. They had seen the men who had been raised to be stoic and respectable come back from the trenches as broken, disillusioned shadows of their former selves. The war had shattered their faith in the old ways, in the old rules, and in the old authorities. It had taught them that life was short, unpredictable, and that the only thing that mattered was living for the moment. The flapper's love of fun, her embrace of risk, and her defiant attitude were all, in a very real sense, a kind of a war wound, a reaction to a trauma that they were still trying to process. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the war also created a new kind of social dynamic. With so many men gone to the front, women had to step up and take on new roles in the workplace and in society. They had to learn to be independent, to drive cars, to manage businesses, and to live without the constant presence of a man. The war had, in a way, given them a taste of a new kind of freedom, a freedom that they were not willing to give up when the men came back home. The flapper was, in a very real sense, a kind of a permanent cultural legacy of a temporary social necessity. Historians still argue whether the war was the sole cause of the flapper revolution or if it was just a powerful accelerant for a change that was already happening. Did the war itself create the flapper, or did it just provide the perfect context for her to emerge? It's a great question. The war was a kind of a cultural crucible, a place where all the old rules were melted down and a new, strange, and beautiful social order was forged in the heat of a global conflict. The flapper was a product of that forging, a woman who was a testament to the fact that even in the most horrific of times, a new kind of life can emerge from the ashes. The Great War also had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It created a new kind of a conversation that a couple could have, a conversation about the fragility of life, the unpredictability of the future, and the importance of living for the moment. The flapper's love of fun was, in a way, a kind of a defense mechanism, a way to deal with the pain and the trauma of a world that had just gone through a global conflict. Her embrace of the chic was a kind of a reaction to the men who had come back from the war as something a little less than human. The flapper was a woman who was looking for a man who was alive, a man who was not a ghost of his former self. So, as you find yourself in a speakeasy, the jazz music a little less carefree than it was before, you are not just a person on a date. You are a person in a world that is still trying to heal from a trauma that is almost too big to comprehend. The flapper era is not just about fun, it is about a kind of a profound, collective reckoning, a generation that is trying to find a new way to live and to love in a world that has just been shattered. The Great War is the ghost in the room, a constant reminder that the party, for all its glory, is a fragile and a temporary thing. The Great War is a kind of phantom limb, a source of pain and phantom feelings that still linger, even as the jazz music plays. The flapper generation, with its love of life and its defiant spirit, is doing its best to ignore the pain, to live in a world that is all about the now. But there's another kind of ghost that is starting to emerge, a ghost that is not from the past, but from the very near future. We're talking about the looming specter of the Wall Street crash. A mainstream historical fact is that the decade's hedonism, its giddy sense of prosperity, and its carefree attitude was on the verge of ending, with a sense of impending doom in the air, a kind of unspoken knowledge that the party couldn't last forever. For the flapper generation, the 1920s felt like a kind of a permanent party, a time of endless prosperity and endless fun. The stock market was soaring, new technologies were emerging, and it felt like the good times would never end. But beneath the surface, there were signs of trouble. The economy was built on a kind of house of cards, a speculative bubble that was bound to burst. The flapper's love of consumerism, her embrace of new products and new technologies, was a direct reflection of this new, consumer-driven economy. But it was an economy that was dangerously unstable. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that some people were so convinced that the party would last forever that they would buy stocks on margin, a practice where they would borrow money to buy stocks with the hope that the stock would go up and they would be able to pay the money back. It was a kind of a financial gamble, a kind of a public spectacle of human greed and human optimism. It's a great example of how a generation's attitude toward risk can be reflected in its economic behavior, with the flapper's love of risk and spontaneity mirrored in the reckless, speculative behavior of the stock market. Historians still argue whether the flapper generation had a kind of an unspoken awareness that the party was going to end. Was the flapper's love of living for the moment a kind of a psychological defense mechanism, a way to deal with a kind of a profound unspoken fear that the good times were not going to last, or was she just genuinely, naively optimistic? It's a great question. The flapper's love of fun was a kind of a glorious, beautiful performance, but it was a performance that was being staged on a very thin layer of ice, an ice that was about to break. The looming specter of the Wall Street crash also had a direct impact on dating etiquette. It created a kind of a new, unspoken urgency, a feeling that you had to live for the moment, that you had to have fun while you still could. The flapper's love of spontaneous dates, of late-night dances, and of illicit cocktails was, in a way, a kind of a race against the clock, a race to have as much fun as possible before the inevitable crash. It was a kind of a romantic version of eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. So, as you find yourself in a speakeasy, the jazz music a little less carefree than it was before, you are not just a person on a date, you are a person in a world that is on the precipice of a profound and a terrifying change. The Wall Street crash is the ultimate party pooper, the invisible ghost in the machine of the dating ritual, a constant reminder that the good times are not going to last forever, The flapper era is a kind of a beautiful, glorious dream, but it is a dream that is about to end. And you, my friend, are one of the people who is living through the final, thrilling moments of it. The party is just about over. The jazz music is fading, the speakeasies are emptying out, and the roadsters are being put away for the night. The good times, the giddy hedonism, and the defiant rebellion of the flapper era are all on the verge of coming to an abrupt and a brutal end. But as you look around you, as you take a last, lingering look at a world that is about to change forever, you can see the profound and the lasting legacy of the flapper era. A mainstream historical fact is that the dating etiquette, the social norms, and the gender roles that were forged in the heat of the 1920s left a lasting impact on modern courtship and on modern life in general. The flapper, with her bobbed hair and her short dress, was not just a passing fad. She was a kind of a prototype for the modern woman. Her independence, her love of fun, her embrace of new technologies, and her defiant attitude were all a kind of a preview for a world that was to come. The flapper taught us that a woman could be independent, that she could be a consumer, and that she could be a person who was looking for a good time, not just a good husband. Her legacy is in every woman who asks a man out on a date, in every woman who pays for her own drink, and in every woman who lives life on her own terms. A quirky or fringe tidbit from this era is that the flapper's legacy is also in the language we use to talk about romance. The terms dating, blind date, and petting are all a part of a language that was born in the 1920s. They are a kind of a linguistic fossil, a constant reminder that the way we talk about love and romance today is a direct result of a cultural revolution that happened 100 years ago. It's a great example of how a generation's slang can become a part of the permanent vocabulary of a culture, a kind of a lasting memorial to a time that is long gone. Historians still argue whether the flapper's legacy was a net positive for women. Did the flapper's embrace of a new, more casual dating culture truly empower women, or did it just create a new set of pressures and a new set of dangers? It's a great question. The flapper was a pioneer, a person who was pushing the boundaries, but those boundaries were still very much in place. The flapper's legacy is a complex one, a mixture of liberation and lingering patriarchal anxieties. She was a woman who was free, but she was a woman who was still a little bit of a prisoner. The legacy of the flapper era is also in the way we think about romance. The flapper taught us that romance could be about more than just a lifelong commitment. It could be about fun, about adventure, about a good conversation, and about a good dance. The flapper's love of living for the moment, her embrace of the now, is a kind of a permanent cultural legacy, a reminder that the best romances are not the ones that are planned, but the ones that are spontaneous, that are fun, and that are a little bit out of control. So, as you find yourself in the silence of a new decade, the jazz music a distant memory, you are not just a person on a date, you are a product of the past, a person who has inherited a kind of a cultural legacy, a legacy that is both beautiful and a little bit heartbreaking. The flapper era is over, but its spirit, its fire, and its rebellion are all still a part of you. The flapper is a kind of a ghost in the machine of your dating ritual, a constant, unspoken reminder that the party is never really over. It just changes. And you, my friend, are living in a world that she helped to create, a world that is a little bit more fun, a little bit more confusing, and a little bit more alive. Now, as we ease out of the jazz age and back to our own time, let the final lingering images fade to a gentle, humming stillness. The flapper's bobbed hair, the sheen of her silk dress, the defiant smoke from her cigarette. These are just echoes now, carried on a soft, quiet breeze. The wild music of the speakeasy has softened to a quiet, soothing rhythm, a lullaby for a world that has finally found its peace. Your mind, which was just a moment ago a flurry of rebellious acts and illicit thrills, is now a calm, still lake. Feel the last of the day's worries drift away, like so many tiny forgotten boats. The stories are all told. The journey is over for tonight. Let the stillness fill the room, and let a gentle calm wash over you. From your head to your toes, you are safe, you are warm, and you are ready for a long, deep, and peaceful sleep. Sweet dreams.